Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's My Games Recruitment Show, where we've got a great show. As you can see, we're going to be talking about how to get more emails into your recipient's email box. And to do that, we have a great guest. We have Nick from Email Nerds. Hi, Nick. How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing good, thanks.
Great, fantastic. And of course, I have Mike here today, who seems to be in my office where I normally record. What's going on, Mike?
Well, I just want to say three groups of words: BT, new fibre optic line, and cock up. Can we just leave it at that?
I think that's best. Yes. So we're currently managing other things today. We've both got one screen. There might be some technical hitches. Please, guys, bear with us. Be nice to us. Be gentle. Be soft. Be kind. Yeah. Okay. So, Mike, can you explain why we've had Nick on the show today?
Sure. Well, first, before I do that, let me just introduce Nick a little bit. Nick is described as an email nerd. I think that's probably the best way to put it. Could you just tell us in a couple of sentences what that means, Nick?
It's a self-styled email nerd. I decided to call myself an email. Years ago, I used to call myself an IT god, but I felt I needed to scale it down a little bit for the
modesty. Not wrong points, obviously. No.
Big.
Yeah. So an email nerd, generally somebody that is really techie with email. That's the best way of describing it. And I lose a lot of people when I start getting too techie. So the word nerd is quite a good one to describe.
Please don't
go
do
with
that.
The glasses as well.
On the show, please don't do that, because we like our audience. Okay, and we're going to get a few little technical things a little later, I think, aren't we? Anyway, to answer your question, Kirsty, I've been around for a very long time, and I remember when email started to become a thing, and then it really did blossom. And then when social media came, it just went away, really, pretty much, because we don't need email lists anymore because we've got LinkedIn or whatever it was. And that's fine, but it's coming back now. It's coming back for several reasons. First of all, there is so much research that says that email is the most cost-effective sales channel that you can have, like by a long chalk, huge amounts more cost-effective than anything else. And I think people are really switching back onto this. I think the second thing is people have realized that if you use social media, somebody else, mainly LinkedIn, owns your data. You don't. So if you've got your own list of people that you regularly communicate with, then you own that. It's entirely yours. And I think that's a kind of a turn on. But the third reason, and probably the most powerful one for today, was that the recognition that there's a lot more emails bandied around these days. So the email service providers and internet service providers are becoming more vicious in terms of what they deem to be acceptable to put into your inbox. And so therefore you need to up your game, which Nick is now going to help us to do.
Well, we fingers crossed, we hope. Okay. So Nick, Mike brings up a good point there. These ISPs and ESPs, I think is what they're called. How do they decide what is and is not spam? Who decides that?
Yeah, and IT is horrible, isn't it? Because there's loads and loads of acronyms. ESP, ISP, even I get confused. Maybe what I should just sort of point out is an ESP and an ISP are almost identical. What they refer to is somebody that's sending email for you, and they're a specialist company. But they all go under these acronyms, and I think it's very easy to get lost under the acronyms. But so let's just not worry about that. It's just whenever we're saying ESP, ISP, an email provider, it's just somebody that sends email on your behalf. I think that's the easiest way of doing it. So in terms of what causes an email to go to spam, actually is a bit of a secret. We don't know. Is the short answer.
It's having the show then, isn't it, really?
Go away. Yeah, that's it. Show done. Yeah, all over. We don't know. Thank you. That's it. So, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the mailbox providers, so the big ones, so like Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, all those big people, they have an algorithm, and they have an algorithm that protects their users, and ultimately they're not going to share that. So when we talk about spam, actually what's going on underneath it is the fact that a big mailbox provider is trying to protect their users from malicious emails. And we've all probably had them, the ones that are malware or anything nasty related. And so these big algorithms also try and catch bulk emails as well. Now, there's a lot of terms I'm throwing around here, but a bulk email is quite important to try and clarify. A bulk email is something that is seen many times over. So, for example, if you had an email that was, to Nick, blah, 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 and you sent that to 10,000 people, that would be picked up as a bulk email. And bulk emails, ESPs, ISPs, those email providers, they don't like, so they go to spam. But ultimately, we don't really know what exactly causes an email to go to spam, because that algorithm is very, very closely guarded.
Now, can I just dive in here for a second and put my recruiter's hat on? I know we got some questions and various bits and bobs of statements coming in now, and if you've got questions, for goodness sake, please ask them, and Nick will do his best to answer them. Just put them in the comments. As a recruiter, the ability to press a button and get a message to a whole bunch of people is very, very alluring, because hey, I can reach out to candidates about an opportunity I've got, or better yet, I can reach out to prospects or existing clients, and whack, all of this stuff is going to get into their inbox. And what you're saying is, I think, is if we do too much of that without thought and care, we can actually cause some damage, because the ESPs just assume, oh, it's one of their emails. Okay, straight into junk then. Is that what you're actually saying? Because that's an important point for these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are deemed to be sending spam in the eyes of a mailbox provider, then not just that email, but all of your emails will land in junk. So yes, it's almost like you get a negative mark against your email address or your domain, and anything you then send goes to junk. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. So that's a big deal. So, and I know at the end of this, you've got some tips that people can do to sort of help stop that from happening, or to get over it. But before then, I wanted to talk about common mistakes. Things that people are often doing, like especially recruiters who are not great at this, that are making things go in there. You said you've got 3 big mistakes that people make with this, and the first one that you told us was technical reasons, which is quite ambiguous. Could you go in a little bit more detail about what technical reasons means?
Yeah, and I can go really technical, but I won't, because
Please don't.
I'll lose myself otherwise. So technical reasons, it's, email has been around since the 80s. And actually, fundamentally, how email works has not changed since the 80s. So it's actually a very, very simple form. Unfortunately, that's really open to abuse. So what's happened is that to try and sort of stem that abuse, many sort of standards and sort of technical configurations have come along over the years, to the extent now that all of the mailbox providers expect to see your email in a certain configuration that has to have all of these technical bits installed. And they're things like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Now, again, more acronyms. Everybody doesn't really know much about them, but at some stage when you set up email, you would be configuring some of these elements.
What you're saying is then that your email setup has to be configured properly, or else you're already putting yourself at a disadvantage.
Yeah. So Google have released last November, and they said if your email does not pass one of those standards that I've just mentioned, then it will automatically go to the junk folder. So it doesn't even matter what the subject line is, what the content is, who it's from. If it doesn't pass these fundamentals, then it automatically goes to the junk.
Right. So it's the first hurdle you need to get over, but it's a fairly simple one, I assume, to sort of get right. Okay. So that's the one thing. And then you sort of mentioned the second one there, which was where this email is actually coming from. What do you mean by that? As in like the country?
Yeah, well, to a certain extent, yes. So if you imagine this as a layer, so we've got the first part, we're passing all our technical one. The second part is where it's coming from. So where it's coming from is the platform or the provider or the person or the ESP, ISP, all those sort of different phrases. They all mean the same thing, but basically where the email is sent from. Now, that could be a CRM. It could be somebody like MailChimp. It could be lots of different providers. It could even be Gmail, or it could be Hotmail, Google, Microsoft. There's a whole host of different email providers. But where that email is sent from, that reputation is checked against all other emails received from that provider. So, if you imagine you're sending out from Gmail, there are millions of users on Gmail. So all of your emails are judged by the millions of others that have gone before. So it's important to understand with some context, because it's very difficult to sort of really drill down into providers and sort of understand where they're sending from. But if you're sending from the cheapest, darkest corner of the internet, then yes, your emails are going to go to junk. If you're using a reputable, a paid for provider, then you've got more chance of it not.
Okay. So in your estimation, what should people be doing? Because let's just look at the auto mailers. We have MailChimp, there's Sourcewell. Most CRM systems these days have some sort of attachment, which is their own version of those products. Is there one which is safer than the other, or are you just taking potluck?
No, there isn't one that's safer than the other, to be honest, and there isn't a golden sort of bullet or anything in all of this. Ultimately, and I have a conflict about this, because in order to get email correct, I would have to say don't send any marketing emails, because it's the marketing emails that kill everything off. But obviously that's not a practical thing to do, because as you mentioned, email marketing is a big thing, and it actually does work when it's done properly and all this sort of thing. So it's a case of balancing act. And it's a case of not sending out emails that just appear to be bulk or spam. So it's, a little bit of personalization, it's all that sort of thing. It's lower numbers, perhaps it's a higher quality list. There's lots of different, reasons why we can sort of look at that. But ultimately, you've got to be balancing up. If you're sending out, 10,000 marketing emails and you only send out 100 operational emails, then in terms of the receiving mailbox providers, they're going to see.
Mike, I know you've got a question, but we've got other questions, and I have stuff to get through. So, this
is a really important one, though, because I think this lies at the fundamental of everything that we do as a firm and that we expect our clients to do. There's a third branch of email, a content email. So, operational, fine. Marketing, fine. But we recommend that most people send content emails, especially on a newsletter. It's about adding value, not selling to anybody or trying to do anything. It's just, hey, look, this is something you're interested in, useful. Is that included in this, or how would that figure in this model?
Yeah. So you're right. There are three different types of sort of four-ish, but three. Yeah. So in terms of what we've got to think about is not so much what we're putting into the email, it's how the recipient responds to it. So for you, in terms of that content, that's value. And so anybody on your list that would be receiving that value would hopefully favorably interact with it. And here we are, segue straight into number 3. So the third reason why email would go to junk, so we talked about the first two, is actually how the recipient responds. Now, this is a relatively new part to all of this, in that, how users used to respond to your emails didn't really matter. But now, if a recipient responds positively, so positive is opening the email, reading the email, replying to the email, clicking the email, forwarding the email, all those sort of general positive marks that you can do to an email, then, that's all taken into account. At the same token, so is negative action. So negative actions is not opening the email, deleting it unread, moving it to junk, and potentially worse than marking it as spam. So all of those are collected in some great big stat vat. And the mailbox providers then sort of come up with some sort of unique score to each individual mailbox provider. That information is not shared. So this could only be a problem for Gmail users, for example. If you send to Gmail users and all of the Gmail users didn't really react very favorably, then everything you sent to Gmail would then go to junk. But you might be sending okay to Microsoft. So it's how the mailbox providers choose to view the recipient's behavior on your emails.
Okay, so that makes sense. That's so you might go into Gmail's junk, but not Outlook's junk, is what you're saying.
Yep.
Okay, yep. Fantastic. That's interesting, actually. So we have had a couple of questions, and I do just want to bring them up, because in a second we are going to go into those kind of practical tips that people can do. First of all, I've got to bring this up, Mike. Karen's
Karen.
Karen's money shirt. So we've got a good question from Julia here. So you've been mentioning spam. So when you say the kind of email gets punished, does that mean some emails won't even get into the spam folder, or do they come through and just go straight in? Is there a block where they never get through to your inbox in any way, or does it always just end up in a spam folder?
Interestingly, if you asked me this question a year ago, I would have said they always go to spam. Pretty much, and if you've got the email address right and everything is correct, then the email will always be delivered, whether it be to the junk folder or to the inbox or promotions tab or whatever. But actually, we're beginning to see mailbox providers actually just drop email. In certain rare cases where the reputation is so low, we're actually seeing email being dropped, not being delivered at all. And that's more common. And worse still is you don't get any notification on that either.
Okay, right. So we are going to go, I really want to get into these practical tips in a minute because it's where I want to spend a lot of time. But we have had this question, which I've sort of spoken to you about this before, Nick, which is how can you reset your email credit? He says rating. He says check its rating. How can, if it's been bad, how can you get it back to 0 again?
Yeah, well, I think we'll answer quite a lot of that in the tips, but just very quickly, you have to basically scale right back and just go back almost back to basics in that, stop all marketing activity. And then you just basically start to send emails that are engaging with your recipients. But I think we'll cover that question a little bit.
We need to get onto those now.
Yes, so I do want to look at these sort of simple steps now. You've got 5 steps for people to get through here today. So let's start with the first one, which you've got as split your email. What do you mean by split? Do you mean send out lots of little emails instead of one big one? What do you mean?
Yeah, put hello on one email and then it's nice to meet you on another email. Yeah, no. So splitting your email is all about whenever a person has a domain and they send an email out from a domain, which is generally what we're talking about here, then you tend to have either one address or 2 address or whatever, but everything goes out via the same domain as such.
So in that case, you would say flair.co.uk. That's our domain. So all our emails go from that. Yeah.
Yeah, whether it's marketing, whether it's outreach, whether it's operational, transactional, they all go out via the same. The problem with that is when you get a bad reputation and your emails are going to junk, then all of your emails are going to junk because it affects the whole domain.
So what we're saying here, domain, then my emails would still go into junk because I'm at Flair as well. Okay.
Yeah. So for recruiters, this is particularly difficult because if they're sending loads of outreach and the outreach has caused them to go to junk in the first place, all of their client interactions, all of their candidate interactions are also then going to junk. So that's when it tends to be a bit of a problem. So what we do is we say, we're going to carve out sending outreach on one domain. We're going to send our operational on another domain, and we're going to send anything else that we've got marketing wise on another domain.
Okay, so that's what Alex has asked here. Can you set up new domains if things have gone really
wrong? You can, yeah. Yeah, so the recommendation is to split it up. Now, the problem with that, though, is that a new domain costs money. You have to host it. There's all these extra technical admin parts around it. So what we suggest is actually something called subdomaining, and that's splitting up your main domain into different elements. And if it's done correctly and each element is configured correctly, remembering the first part, the technical bit that we talked about, if all of that is done correctly, then actually each sort of segment of your domain has its own reputation. So if you send out outreach, for example, and for some reason, your outreach causes some particular issue and you end up going to junk with your outreach, your operational emails are not affected. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect your operational emails. And these are the emails that are going to clients and candidates, contracts and interview schedules and all that sort of stuff.
Splitting your email up into separate domains, that's one thing that we can do. And then the second thing that we can do is email authentication. So is this like double opt-ins and stuff like that?
No, so this is the technical bit. This is the techie bit. This is adding those standards that we talked about, the SPF, DKIM and DMARC, getting those all configured correctly. And you have to apply it to each part that you're separating up.
Now, you're not allowed to pitch on this show, but that's normally what you would do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's something that you're going to need someone to help you with, really. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got that, which I don't want to spend too much time on because I imagine there's more acronyms in there and my brain is already getting an acronym out, which is a difficult thing to say. So let's move on to the third thing, which is stop using email auto warmers. Can you explain to me what exactly an email auto warmer is and why I should stop using it?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to say, isn't it? So an email auto warmer is something that came along a couple of years ago to enable anybody that's sending emails, a lot of emails, to scale up warming up. Now, what is classed as warming up? Warming up is a favorable, positive interaction. So remember we talked about the positive interactions in terms of, opening, replying, all that sort of thing. What an auto warmer does is effectively replicate that, but at scale. So it's you load up your mailbox to it. It has loads of other customer mailboxes, and they send dummy emails all across the network. And then it automatically opens it, pulls it back from junk, replies to it. It does that sort of warming up, but automatically. It's all that positive
So
type
it gives you
of action.
a false rating on your email domain, really. Gives it a higher
Yeah,
rating.
so you can, you can scale this up and scale this up, and you can be sending tens of thousands of emails a day that are all favorable. And they worked for a period, but Google recently have just raged a bit of a war against some of the providers that are doing that. And what we're seeing is certainly with those domains that use auto warmers, they're starting to see more email going to junk. So the advice is now actually to stop auto warmers. The reason they came about, though, is because people are lazy, and to actually warm up a domain without an auto warmer just takes a little bit of work. So you have to go in there and do that warming up yourself.
Julia's asked, are auto warmers kind of like a welcome sequence? When somebody starts their new email domain, they do it immediately to get it nice and welcomed.
Yeah, sort of. They basically try and replicate how we would, send an email to one another.
Okay. So what you're saying is no longer is an auto warmer a good thing to do. You just have to do it the old-fashioned way. Roll your sleeves up, put your elbow grease in. Okay. Now this next point is one that I know Mike is particularly fond of, because it's something that we tell a lot of our clients, and that is what we refer to as list hygiene, which, by the way, is a really difficult word to spell. Can you just explain what you think, what we mean when we say list hygiene?
So ultimately, list hygiene is all about who you are sending it to. Ultimately, you want to be in a place where everybody on your list has double opted in, i.e. they really want to receive your email. I know that's not always practical, and a lot of recruiters also, buy lists or they scrape lists, and it's just one of these things where lists are lists. But you can get, there's sort of layers to all of this, but one of the layers is that if you are sending a lot of bounced emails, so if you haven't checked to see whether there's actually a proper email address or a person at the end of that email address, then you get a bounce back. If you get a lot of those bounce backs, then that goes negatively against you in terms of the mailbox provider. So therefore, they would then put your email to junk. So you might do all this good work outside of that, but still end up in junk because your list is not, basically the people on your list are not expecting your email, and they should be.
Okay, so do you
can I just dive in on that one for a second, because there's something else here that originally a lot of the auto mailers are really designed for online salespeople. So they are building up this, your Jeff Walkers and your Frank Kerns, and they've got hundreds of thousands of people on their list, and they just whack him out. I mean, Frank Kern changes his domain name that he sends it from every 10 minutes, but we're not in that camp, right? So they cannot do anything other than deal with people in bulk because of the numbers that they've got. The way we expect people to use email of this nature, you're going to send an email out to more than one person, but you're really talking in tens or hundreds, not in thousands. And this is a really big differentiator. If you're building certainly if you're building a revenue factory, the sort that we recommend, then this is a tool to get content predominantly, mostly content to someone, and every now and again you can put a promo out there and ask for something. So you can spend a lot more time making sure that your list is hygienic, a lot more time, and you should, because if you do that, more of your important messages, the ones you really want to get through where you're asking for something, will get through. If you don't, if you operate like a big online marketer but with only a small list, you're going to be in trouble, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. And that's really what Nick's saying here. Keep that list hygienic. It's very important that you do.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. And then the final point, Nick, before we sort of round up, is structure an email for a reply. So I think I know what you mean by this, but so you're just basically saying like make it so it's easy for that individual to reply back to you and interact with you within the email.
It's a response, really, isn't it? Not just necessarily
Yeah.
a reply. It's a
Yeah.
response,
But-
really.
So in the past, pretty much all outreach and marketing emails have always been click the link or, do something or phone me or whatever it is. But the golden rule with all of this is you've got to think about what email is. Email is a conversational tool. And for us to send out, an email blast to click a link is not really a conversation. It's a very one-sided conversation. So ultimately, actually, what the call to action on an email should always be a reply. And your email sort of tech stack, if you like, should be configured in a way that the replies get back to you, because there's no point just replying and it doesn't get back to you. So it's all about having a conversation, because then you reply back and there's a conversation, and that's ultimately what we do on email. If you are thinking along those lines whenever you're crafting any sort of outreach email or any sort of content marketing email, if you are thinking that I want to invoke a conversation, then a lot of things change for you and a lot of things will start to sort of make a bit more sense. And it's what the mailbox providers want. They want replies. They want the conversation to be had.
Because it shows that person actually wanted that, opened it, read it, and did something with it. Now, we were talking off air before we came on about a clutch of very practical things that people can do in this section. Things like get people to double opt in for an email. If it's an email list, so you can register them if you want. It sends them an email and say, "Are you sure you want this?" And they say, "Yeah, I do." Get them to put the domain name and the email address that this is your newsletter or whatever is coming from. Get them to put that in their Outlook contacts. Get them to nominate a domain as a safe sender, which you can easily do. Get them to reply to an email, especially if it's gone to junk. Take it out of junk, put it in your inbox, and reply to it. These are all very practical steps, but they're things that you can't do in bulk. Comes back to that. You can't send an email out to get people to do this, because that email would have gone into junk as well. So you really have to ring people up or talk to them, don't you, to make it work. And if you're growing a small but very, very potent list, would you agree, or would you not agree, that that's the kind of level that you need to do if you want to make sure your emails are getting through?
Yeah, it's all about that positive interaction. So what you want is that positive interaction. That mailbox provider wants to see, or you want to prove to that mailbox provider that you are a positive emailer. And all the things you said, adding to contacts and safe sender lists, all those sorts of things are all positive actions. So that's ultimately what you're trying to achieve. And even things like, you can really segment your list. So you can send most frequently to those that engage most with your content. So those that open the emails the most, those that sort of reply, click, or whatever, they're your hot list, and they're the ones that you can email regularly, weekly, daily, even if it's that important. The ones that are less warm, and they might open it occasionally, or they might open 1 in 4, they're the ones you scale back on, because they're the ones that are more likely to cause you to go to the junk folder. But there is one very key thing in all of this that I find with recruiters.
That's enough for that. That's enough now. I think we'll just finish at that point. It's a joke. It's a joke.
He's joking.
Thanks. I'll get my coat. Yeah, the one thing that always lands recruiters in hot water is candidate outreach. And the reason candidates especially is that they're the ones that are most likely to mark an email negatively. Client, when it's B2B, when you're doing some sort of client outreach, they expect emails to a certain extent. We all run a business, we all get those emails. To us, that we're a little bit more lenient in those types of emails. Candidates will throw your email out to the junk folders quicker than you can say anything. So candidate outreach is the one where you have to be really, really, really hot.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we've come into the end of our time now. Now, in a second, Nick, we're going to come to you and ask you for the top tip, the thing that you could do that makes the most difference, like today. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned from today is that you have to be intentional with email. It's not just the lazy man's marketing. You have to be intentional, put to work in, which is, I think, the biggest takeaway for me. But Mike, can we talk about who we have on next week's show?
Yeah, we don't need to talk about it. There it is. Look, Carl Jones, he's a commission scheme expert, and he's coming on to talk about commission schemes. And if you read the blurb for this, which will be going out later on this afternoon, you'll see all the questions we're going to ask him. If you're interested in commission, if you want to make commission work for you, then really you need to come to this show.
Okay, fantastic. So that should be a good one. Nick, your top tip, the thing that somebody should do if they want to improve, get more emails into their recipient's inbox, what's the one thing that you say that they should do?
Other than hire me, of course,
The
one thing that you should do is always think about the reply. The reply is the biggest thing because it's a mindset change. If you're thinking about getting a reply, you're crafting your email differently.
Okay.
So that's my biggest tip. Go for the reply.
I love that.
That's a great tip. And as we mentioned, you did just sort of make a joke on it, but if anybody is interested in learning more about this and how they can kind of streamline their process or improve their destination, is the best thing to do just to connect with you on LinkedIn.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, I would like to say thank you very much to everybody who's watched and commented. We have had this very lovely comment, which is a really useful show. So thank you, Julia. But she did also say this, which is, I think, my favorite part of the show. But thank you very much, everybody. Commented. Thank you so much to Nick for adding a lot of value today. I learned a lot, definitely, and I didn't get bombarded by an acronym. So I'm a huge fan of that. So thank you so much, Nick, for being here today.
No, thank you.
No worries. And Mike, just thanks for being you, really, in my office.
It's great. I knew this would be a great show. I've learned a tremendous amount. I'm telling you this. First of all, we're hiring Nick. I'm not just saying that because he's here. He's in. And secondly, when Peter comes back from Australia, we're having a big email project to get the whole thing sorted out. So watch this space.
Fantastic. So thank you very much, and we'll see you all next week.